Have you ever found yourself doing something on a whim and then a while down the line feeling it may not have been the right step for you? Perhaps you reflected it wasn't worth the effort, the money, the time, the energy. And I have definitely been there. You know, applying for jobs that didn't make my soul sing, often out of fear that no one would ever want to employ me again. That was a really big one. This kind of crushing self-doubt that I had to crush or suppress in turn. Or perhaps you've started a relationship that you've known in your heart hasn't been right. And at the time it seemed like a good idea, but that feeling quickly faded. And then there's the other stuff we do. Perhaps booking an expensive holiday, believing it was going to be the solution to counteract the stress that we might be feeling elsewhere in our life. And I've definitely done that in the past, when what I really needed to do was turn toward the source of stress and understand what I could change about how I was experiencing it. And then there's the day-to-day things, like deciding to reorganise a filing system, or going for an enormous walk, or meeting a friend, or cleaning the house, or rewriting an entire website, and then feeling guilty later that that thing that you did was simply a way to avoid doing something else that you feel really needed doing. Whether it did or didn't, it's the feeling that it really did. So the confusing thing about all of this, of course, is that those things that we chose to do, they might have been acts of avoidance. Or maybe they could be a state of flow. And how do we tell the difference? So that is what we're going to be talking about today. The distinction between procrastination, percolation, avoidance, and flow. And my sense is that this is going to be quite a big topic, actually, quite an expansive topic. So I'm calling this part 1, and then we'll just see whether part 2 materialises. And that in itself is a marker. If part 2 doesn't turn up, is it because of procrastination, percolation, avoidance, or flow? And that just feels kind of perfect as an entry point as we come into this exploration of the idea. So I come up with lots of ideas, and some of them I jump on really enthusiastically, fired up in the moment, and later I wonder why I've done it. Some I jump on again enthusiastically, fired up in the moment, and later I am so grateful that I followed where the energy flowed. Some I do sit with and I return to, perhaps again and again, until they become clear and I know the way forward. Some I put to one side and I never visit again. And some, of course, end up here in the podcast. And I am so grateful to have this space to explore things with you. So this is one of those. So for those of you watching on YouTube, there was a little hiatus there because there was a big noise in the background. So I'll edit that out of the actual podcast itself. But you're just going to hear me repeat some of those words because this is a live recording. So some of those things I put to one side and I never visit again. And some, of course, end up here in the podcast. And I am so grateful to have this space to explore things with you. And this topic, this approach to this whole subject is one of those moments. So thank you for listening and for being here as we explore this. So a little while ago, a couple of weeks ago, I woke up with this idea to make a percolation board. Somewhere that I put all of the ideas I come up with. So I know they're captured and I can see how far they travel in the process of percolation. Now, the things that might appear on your percolation board are very likely to be different from mine. But they could include things like starting a specialist podcast on a subject that you're really, really fascinated about. Maybe building an extension on your house could be one of yours. Signing up for an allotment. Changing your phone, that might be one. Selling your car, redecorating a room, leaving your job, setting up a profile on a dating app. The list is endless and endlessly varied. And it is astonishing how much stuff pours through our heads when we really start taking notice. How many thoughts are swimming around in there, trying to take our attention, each one. I think of them as salmon swimming through me. I might do a podcast about this because this was quite a recent realization, but I think of them as these salmon, and they're bright and shiny and they're fast moving, and they're trying to take my attention. And these salmon, they pour through our minds, these thoughts pour through our minds, and we can find ourselves in a constant state of doing, springing from one thing to the next without really taking time to consider if it's really helping us move forward. And of course, the opposite can be true as well. We can find ourselves in a total state of apathy because there's so much going on that we don't know where to place our attention. So we can feel completely overwhelmed, and that is a very stuck place. So I'm definitely better at it these days. I tend now to rest with an idea before leaping on it, though not always. And it really depends which part of me is driving the show. So if it's the part that worries that I'm not doing enough, she can be very active, then I can find myself getting busy without a clear purpose or intention or really an understanding of why I'm doing what I'm doing. If it's the part that sees what others are doing and gets activated, perhaps gets jealous, then I can find myself imitating them. And that can show up like maybe paying for a service or some training or a product that might not actually be the thing that I need. I actually want to make a really quick note about jealousy, because we often see it as a, inverted commas, bad thing. I think it's one of the 7 sins, and thou shalt not covet thy neighbour's ass. I believe I've quoted the Bible correctly there. Now, a friend of mine shared a really wonderful phrase with me this summer, that jealousy is a lighthouse. Now, I can't remember who she said it, or the meaning that the original author attributed to it. But for me, it sparked a thought that felt very true. Jealousy is a lighthouse. It shines a light on something that we are not yet creating in our own life. And that, on some level, we sense is something that our heart desires us to create, something that we are seeking in our own life. Now, it might not be exactly what we see another person doing or having. It's simply that something about what we have witnessed is enough to create that lighthouse effect. And of course, if we simply have a knee-jerk response, then we might find ourselves going down a path that's not really the right route for us. So I refer back to my earlier point. And often, of course, we mask jealousy by being critical of the person or the thing that sparked our jealous feelings. You know, we might turn on it and say things like, well, I wouldn't have done it like that. Or who does she think she is? Or one that I heard only this summer, it's a rubbish party and I didn't really want to go anyway. When in fact, what we could say is, I wonder what it is about what I'm seeing that's shining a light on what my own heart desires. And this is where a percolation board could come in handy. We write a note, we pin it to the centre, saying the thing we think we want. And then over the coming hours, days, weeks, months, depending on what it is, we move that pin up or down the board. So for you, when something percolates, I don't know whether, instinctively you think of it going up or down. For me, I feel that knowledge goes down through my body, like percolates down through my body. So my head can think something to be true. Then as my awareness deepens, it travels into my heart and I feel it to be true. But it's only when it reaches my belly, my inner intuition, that I know it to be true with every ounce of my being. So that's the knowledge kind of percolating down. However, when I think about this percolation board, this imaginary percolation board, which doesn't yet exist, I see ideas floating up to the top. So the approach I'm considering is this: a big cork board, maybe like 4 feet high, standing on the ground, and a couple of feet wide. Some scraps of paper and a load of drawing pins, because, as I said before, I get a lot of ideas running around my head. And all the things that I consider doing will go onto their own scrap of paper, and I'll pin them to the centre of the board. And then, as my attention or my desire or my energy grows or wanes, they'll either move up or down the board. Now, I called this episode Procrastination, Percolation, Avoidance, or Flow. So I am very mindful that this technique, this route, could simply be a reimagining of a to-do list. And if you ever listen to the episode I recorded quite a while back now, I'll put a link to it in the show notes, all about to-do lists, then you'll know that I've been weaning myself from that particular addiction for quite some time now. So I recognise that this idea in itself really needs to percolate, because it could be a beautiful energy sink. As so many of the ideas that I come up with can be, if I'm really honest. But of course, many of the ideas I come up with, they're wonderful things. So I recognise now that none of these salmon, none of them are wasted. They all swim up through me to their spawning ground, where they create more salmon that then swim out and through me and out into the wide open, where they become something incredible, maybe beautiful. So there's something here about this kind of continuous process of learning from what we're experiencing. And that's really what the percolation board is actually about. It's about noticing where the energy is sitting once we put something onto the board. And as I wrote this episode, I felt myself flashing through times when I've bought and built and written and created things that really weren't worth the effort, the time, the money that I invested in them. You know, there were times when I have paid for bits of software because I've believed they're the thing that's going to make my business run more smoothly. And it was a fear response that if I didn't have it, in some way I was lacking the thing that it was promised to me through using that bit of software. When in fact I've bought it, I've barely used it, and realised my old system just needed a bit of a tweak. Or there have been times when I've spent hours and hours redesigning my website or rewriting a training program when really I was just avoiding doing something else. Or there was the time when I signed my whole family up for an expensive gym membership for a year, and then we barely went. You know, how common is that one? Hands up if you've ever done something similar. And of course, the danger here is that if we put everything on the percolation board and wait to see how it moves, then we might never do anything. We might fall into that place of procrastination. And going back to that point around to-do lists, part of the reason why I've weaned myself off them is because in the act of writing something down, it's almost like it sort of fulfills part of the need for doing that task. And it's a bit like we start to believe that we've completed it, and therefore it can just sit forever on that to-do list. We turn the page, we write another to-do list, and that thing got forgotten. And the percolation board could, of course, be exactly the same thing. We write things on these scraps of paper, we pop them into the middle of the board, and that's where they stay. So my sense is that there is a really simple solution here. Oh, and there's something about guilt showing up here as well. That there's kind of guilt can be associated with to-do lists, or with, you know, maybe writing something down and putting it onto the percolation board and then feeling guilty that we haven't done something with it, particularly if we've got a high performance driver. Just waving my hand in acknowledgement there. So how do we tell the difference? What's the thing that helps us see when something is procrastination, percolation, you know, useful percolation, avoidance, or flow, which is obviously, you know, this kind of ideal place that where we want to be, where everything is aligned with what feels right for us, energetically, intuitively, emotionally, professionally, you know, whatever. So the solution that I am noticing arises when I think about this is if we know that something is genuinely to our benefit. So going back to that head, heart, belly thing I mentioned before, if we know, like deep down in our belly, that it is genuinely to our benefit, we get that like pull from our intuitive voice, then do it. If I get the urge to put on my running shoes and head out on the road, then that is not the time to write it on a piece of paper and stick it on the board, because my energy conserving self will almost likely relegate it to the bottom of the pile and put something else higher up it. So checking on where the idea is coming from is very useful here. Is it your head? In which case, it might be just trying to get you to do something because it wants to avoid doing something else that feels harder but might be of more use. Or it might be a triggered response, So could it be coming even perhaps from your heart? Maybe it's an emotional trigger to do something in an attempt to stop you feeling bad about something else. So it's important here to really kind of feel into what are the feelings that are associated with this idea, this thought, this action. Or is it your belly? In which case, it may very well be exactly what you're meant to be doing. So deepening that self-awareness of where a thought or an idea is arising from, deepening that self-awareness with profound self-compassion, of course, and always, I believe is part of what helps us distinguish between which is which. And for so many of us, me included, learning how to distinguish between when something is being driven by our head, when something is being driven by our heart, and when something is arising from our belly, that really is the work. And my sense is that this idea of the procrastination board could perhaps help me differentiate between them. Because by putting it on the board, it can sort of help me see, okay, so where is the energy around this? We know that thoughts, emotions, feelings, they have a kind of 15-second lifespan. And it's when we turn toward it, it's when we give it more space to grow that it starts to last longer. So this is where in mindfulness, we teach ourselves and we are taught to be really discerning about the thoughts that really are to our benefit and the ones that really are to our detriment, and then choosing where we want to place our attention. And in the same way with feelings as well, what are the feelings that are to our benefit and what are the feelings that are to our detriment, and where do we want to place attention? Now, that doesn't mean suppressing anything. It means really noticing everything, but really being mindful about where we expend our energy, where we spend our time. And my sense is that this percolation board is almost like a tool to support us with doing that. And it's funny because when I first wrote this, when I got to the end of writing it, I had really decided not to do the board because I thought it is a procrastination tool. It is somewhere where I'm going to sink a load of time and energy writing all the ideas I have in my various kind of books and notes and putting them on the board and getting it nicely organised. And, gosh, I could spend a lot of time doing that. So that felt like, okay, that's my head in a place of avoidance. And now, having let it sit for a while, I feel actually it could be a really useful tool to support me in seeing, well, what really is drawing my attention, and to do it without judgment. So again, if I choose to let an idea sink to the bottom of the board, do you know what? Even just as I say that, I think I might reorganise the way the board is and have it as head, heart, belly. That feels like such a better idea. So as I notice where something sinks down the board into the belly space, then I can really begin to sort of trust that is where my attention is asking me to go. That is where I'm most aligned with what feels like flow. And if I notice that there's lots of limiting beliefs, self-doubts, stories attached to a thought or an idea or an action that I think I ought to do, I should do, I must do, then I can move it up the board and then spend a little bit of time examining, well, where is the value in that thought? Because all of this stuff has value. These ideas, they're all coming from a part of us that is really trying to do something useful. It's just that in the moment, it might have got a bit misguided. So an example that springs to mind for me now is I mentioned about like bits of software that I've bought for my business. Now, I run most of my business online. I coach online. I sell my books through the website, that's online. The podcast is obviously online. And I send out emails every week about the new episodes of the podcast. And hopefully you're one of the people that I write to, because I love writing those emails. There are lots of tools out in the world that help companies like mine, businesses like mine, operate more efficiently. Now, they can be very expensive to use. And it's really hard, unless you're an expert, to know which are the ones that are really valuable and which are the ones that really aren't going to do what it is that you most need. So I admit this, over the last 5 years since I've been, sort of in this part of my life, I have spent money on things that really haven't served me, that really haven't served the business. A couple of them where I bought them and then didn't even use them. I mean, gosh, that sounds crazy, doesn't it? But, and others where I've sort of used it a bit, but then not really understood it and got distracted by something else. And, that's okay, because I have learnt through those actions. And so it's also about seeing those things and not observing them from a place of judgment, but just seeing, okay, so what was it that was inside that meant that I was looking for something else, something other than what I had. And it's this act of seeing, okay, so where does the idea begin? And putting it appropriately in that space that then enables us to understand how much we need to examine it in order to see what is it about the idea that is most going to serve us. And as I said right at the beginning of this episode, I think there is so much more here to explore about the differentiation between procrastination, percolation, avoidance and flow. And there are so many routes in to explore each one of those topics, but hopefully this has been a route that has sparked some thoughts for you. And I'd really love to know what it means for you, what's come up for you. Like I said as well, if you're not part of the mailing list, then please do sign up. You can do that on the podcast page of the website, hennyflynn.co.uk. And in those emails, I'll also sort of be expanding on some of these thoughts as well. So thank you so much for joining. Let's see if there is a part 2 to this one, and I'm so grateful to you being here. It's just wonderful to know that we're walking this path together, and I send you a hug and a wave.